January 7, 1945, Brussels, Belgium. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery held a press conference while the Battle of the Bulge was still raging. German forces had shattered parts of the American front, and Montgomery had been given temporary command of American forces north of the breakthrough. Montgomery spoke calmly to reporters. He described how command arrangements had been reorganized, how defensive positions were strengthened, how the situation had stabilized. American commanders listening to the broadcast grew uneasy. The facts were not entirely disputed, but the tone suggested that British leadership had rescued faltering American forces. General Omar Bradley considered resignation if Montgomery remained in command. Eisenhower intervened. Churchill moved quickly to calm tensions. What happened publicly was only part of the story. Papers preserved in archives and later published in biographies showed a different tone in private correspondence. In public, Montgomery emphasized Allied cooperation. In private letters, his criticism of American methods could be sharper and more personal. This is the story of what Montgomery's papers revealed about Allied command, how professional culture shaped strategy, and why the gap between public diplomacy and private frustration nearly fractured the coalition that was winning the war. History remembers victories. This channel examines the tensions behind them, the things commanders never said publicly. Subscribe. 1944 to 1945. Montgomery commanded 21st Army Group, British and Canadian forces in Northwest Europe. He operated alongside large American armies under the overall command of General Dwight Eisenhower. Publicly, Montgomery emphasized Allied unity, cooperation between armies, a shared mission to defeat Germany. Press conferences acknowledged American contribution. He spoke about partnership and combined effort. Montgomery understood political reality. Britain depended on American manpower and industrial power. Public criticism could damage the alliance, something Churchill repeatedly warned against. So Montgomery maintained a diplomatic face. Yet correspondence preserved in archives showed that privately his assessments often sounded different. Montgomery's papers, later used in authorized biographies and held in archival collections, reveal a consistent pattern. In private letters to British officials, his language could become more critical than his public statements suggested. Letters to Alan Brooke, chief of the Imperial General Staff, expressed frustration with Allied command arrangements. Montgomery questioned strategic direction and argued for different approaches. He repeatedly preferred a concentrated single thrust rather than Eisenhower's broader front strategy. Letters to Churchill also reflected concern about American operational methods. Montgomery argued that British experience should guide Allied operations more directly. The pattern emerging from correspondence was not simple hostility, but professional conviction. Montgomery believed the British way of war, based on careful planning and methodical execution, differed fundamentally from what he viewed as an American reliance on mass and material advantage. Those convictions shaped his relationships and decisions throughout the campaign. July 1943, Sicily. Montgomery commanded British 8th Army. Patton led American 7th Army. Planning exposed deep differences in philosophy. Montgomery argued for a plan emphasizing the British advance, with Americans securing flanks. Patton pushed for independence. The campaign soon turned into a race toward Messina. Patton arrived first. In correspondence, Montgomery reframed the outcome. The British advance had been methodical and deliberate. The American advance was faster, but, in his view, less systematic. The pattern was set early. When results favored Americans, Montgomery tended to reinterpret outcomes through professional standards he trusted. June 1944, Normandy. Montgomery initially served as ground forces commander. His strategy centered on drawing German armor toward Caen while Americans prepared a breakout in the west. Caen proved harder than expected. Progress slowed. Then came Operation Cobra. American forces under Bradley broke through at Saint-Lô with dramatic success. Publicly, Montgomery acknowledged the achievement. Privately, correspondence framed events differently, arguing British forces had pinned German reserves, enabling the American breakout. When Eisenhower later assumed direct command of ground operations, Montgomery's letters showed growing concern about strategy. He argued that a broad front dispersed Allied strength and that concentrated command would be more effective. Historians acknowledge this debate had genuine strategic depth. Yet American commanders noticed that Montgomery's preferred solution almost always placed him in central command. December 16, 1944. German forces attacked through the Ardennes. With communications disrupted, Eisenhower temporarily assigned Montgomery command of American forces north of the breakthrough. Militarily, the decision made sense. Montgomery's handling of operations was effective. Defensive lines were organized, British reserves positioned. The German offensive slowed. But politics intervened. On January 7, 1945, Montgomery held a press conference. He described the situation he inherited and the reorganization he introduced. Again, the issue was tone. American listeners felt the presentation implied British leadership had rescued a confused American command. Bradley considered resignation. Patton reacted angrily. Churchill intervened and persuaded Montgomery to issue a conciliatory statement praising American forces. Correspondence afterward suggests Montgomery did not fully understand the reaction. To Brooke, he expressed confusion about American sensitivity. He saw the issue as factual description. Americans saw it as public humiliation. Montgomery grasped operations well, but often underestimated the political and emotional dimensions of coalition warfare. Across correspondence, a recurring pattern appears. British success was often explained through professionalism and planning. American success was frequently interpreted as circumstances or supporting effects from British operations. Patton's Rhine crossing at Oppenheim was described as opportunistic. The Saint-Lô breakout was interpreted as enabled by British pressure elsewhere. These views were not unique to Montgomery. Many British officers shared similar perspectives. But Montgomery was the most senior British commander working directly with Americans, meaning his judgments carried political consequences. And when private perspectives leaked into public behavior, alliance crises followed. Context mattered. The British Army was a long-established professional institution. Officers and non-commissioned leaders often had years of training and service. British forces had been fighting continuously since 1939. The American Army expanded rapidly after 1941. Many officers and soldiers entered combat with far less experience. From Montgomery's point of view, differences were obvious. British emphasis on planning and casualty management reflected limited manpower and professional tradition. American operations often appeared faster, more aggressive, and supported by massive industrial resources. Montgomery's observations were partly correct, but incomplete. American strategy deliberately leveraged industrial strength and manpower. British strategy reflected scarcity and experience. Both approaches were rational for their circumstances. Correspondence suggests Montgomery sometimes interpreted difference as hierarchy, not simply variation, and this assumption shaped how he judged American performance. These tensions had real effects. After the Bulge press conference, Eisenhower reportedly considered removing Montgomery. Churchill's intervention prevented deeper rupture. Politically, Americans began questioning whether Britain saw the alliance as equal partnership. Within the command structure, relationships suffered. Bradley refused further service under Montgomery. Patton avoided cooperation where possible. Post-war memoirs reflected these tensions, acknowledging Montgomery's competence while criticizing his personality. The gap between diplomatic language and private assessment eventually became visible through repeated incidents. When Montgomery's papers became available through archives and later biographies, historians gained clearer understanding. Private correspondence showed sharper criticism than public statements. Earlier histories emphasized strategy alone. Later scholarship added another dimension: professional culture and national pride inside the alliance. Conflicts with Patton and Eisenhower were not only operational debates but also arguments about authority, professionalism, and national identity. Documents helped explain actions that once seemed puzzling, including recurring arguments over command and persistent friction between allies who nevertheless fought together successfully. Montgomery was a capable operational commander whose plans frequently achieved objectives, yet coalition warfare demanded more than operational skill. It required political sensitivity and public respect between allies. Publicly, Montgomery cooperated. Privately, correspondence suggests he often questioned American methods and standards. Those private views were not secret forever. Archives and biographies preserved them, adding complexity to the historical record. What American commanders sensed during the war was later documented. What British political leadership managed behind the scenes became clearer. The story was not simply personal conflict. It reflected a deeper professional culture clash: British military tradition meeting American industrial warfare. Montgomery embodied that tension. Public diplomacy required equality. Private conviction sometimes resisted it. Political leaders on both sides repeatedly intervened to maintain unity, and the alliance held. Montgomery's papers reveal not a hidden scandal, but a difficult reality. Winning coalitions are rarely harmonious. They are negotiated constantly between personalities, institutions, and national pride. Public Montgomery spoke of unity. Private Montgomery revealed the strain behind it. History records both, because both were true. Every campaign leaves a hidden aftermath. Follow for the stories commanders never fully explained.